Hi, I'm Chris Converse, and welcome to part 1 of this 3-part series on creating a 3D product box. In this series, we'll use HTML, CSS, and a sprite sheet graphic in order to make a 3D box graphic for your web page. In this episode, part 1, we'll create the necessary HTML and CSS in order to create the 3 visible sides of our product box. So if you'd like to follow along with me, download the exercise files, and let's begin by opening the HTML file named box.html in a text editor. So once you have the box.html file open, up in the head area, you'll see a link to style.css. There's also an index.html file in the exercise files. That file also links to this same style.css. But I want to create the box in a blank file without any background settings, so I have a local override here so that we can see how the box is actually constructed. Then in part 3, we will add the HTML code from this page into the index file. So to begin, let's add the HTML that we'll need for the product box. So let's come down here and delete the comment. Let's add a div element. Let's add a class. We'll name this product. Let's end the div tag. Let's hit a few returns and let's end the div element. Let's get our cursor inside, and now let's create the div container that's going to be the main container to hold the box. So let's add another div element. Let's add a class of box to this one. End the tag, hit a few returns, end the element. And now inside we're going to create a div for the top, front, and left faces of the box. So for the first one, we'll add another div tag. Let's add a class of top. Let's end the tag. And just for now, let's add in the word top inside of the div so that we can see this in the web page. This way, when we start adding some of our CSS, we'll be able to understand how the CSS is manipulating the divs. Then we'll end that element. Let's duplicate this. Let's rename the second one from top to front. Same thing for the text inside. And for the third one, we'll rename this from top to left. And same thing for the text inside. With this in place, we can hit save. If you look at this HTML file in a browser, you'll now see that we have our 3 divs with top, front, and left. So with that in place, let's go back to the exercise files and let's open up style.css in our text editor. So now in the CSS file, let's scroll down. After the footer rule that targets the anchor tags, let's come down here and let's start by creating a rule that's going to target the main product class. So type .product, then a space. This is the main container that's going to hold the box container, which in turn is holding the 3 different faces. So for this, let's come in here and let's just set a size so we can see this in the web page. So we'll just set this to 50 pixels. The size here doesn't really matter because we're going to be covering it up with the box graphic inside. Next, let's set a height property. We'll set this to 50 pixels as well. And again, just so we can see this, let's come in here and add a background color. I'll use a really light gray, so $, and 3 C's. Next, let's add a perspective property. Now the perspective property is going to sort of simulate how close or far away you are from the object. So we're going to use 1000 pixels, then a semicolon. And then finally, let's add a perspective origin. So perspective-origin, colon space, and we're going to set this to center. So that's all we need right now for the product class. Let's come out here and add a new rule, and let's target the box container inside of the product container. So .product space .box. Add in our brackets. Let's hit a few returns. Here we're going to set the width to 100%. Next line, we're going to set the height to 100%. Next, we'll add a position property, and we'll set this to absolute. And then temporarily, let's put a border on this so we can see what's happening in our CSS. Later on, we'll remove this. So border colon space, we'll set the size to 1 pixel, solid, and we'll use a color blue. So $, 0 for red, 0 for green, and F for blue, then a semicolon. Now the next property we're going to set is called transform style, and we're going to set this to preserve 3D, which is going to enable 3D for this box element plus all of its children, which is the front, top, and left panels. So we'll type transform dash style, and we'll set this to preserve dash 3D, then a semicolon. And then finally, let's add some rotation. So we'll type transform, colon space. We're going to rotate the X value. So rotate, then capital X, put in our parentheses. We're going to set the X value to negative 15 degrees. So negative 15, then DEG for degrees, then a space. We're going to set rotate Y, put in our parentheses, 26 degrees inside of the parentheses, then a space, and then we're going to move this panel along the Z axis. So we're going to use translate Z. So translate Z, the Z is capital, put in our parentheses, and we're going to translate this 0 pixels, then a semicolon. So with these in place, save your CSS, and if we go back to the browser, we'll now see that the light gray box is the product container, and the box container, and you can see this is being skewed just a bit from the product container. So now we're going to create a rule that's going to target all of the divs inside of the box element, so we can give all of those the same properties, and then we'll create a rule for each one of the sides. So back in our CSS, I'll scroll up here a little bit. Let's come in here and target all of the divs inside of the box class. So we'll type .product space .box space div. So that's going to target the top, front, and left divs. Let's come in here and set a position property of absolute. Let's set a font size. We're going to make this larger again just so we can see these, of 4 ems. And then finally, let's add a border so we can see what's happening here as well. So size of 1 pixel, solid, and we'll make the color red. So £, F for red, and then 0 for green and blue. Semicolon, let's hit save. Now we can see the individual red squares now showing up here for the top, left, and front divs. Now to position and size these, let's come down here and target each one of those individual sides. So .product space .box space .top. Put in our brackets. And for the width, we're going to set this to 200 pixels. This is going to be determined by the sprite sheet, and we're going to be talking about that in part 2. Next property for the top div is going to be the height. We're going to set this to 200 pixels as well. And now we're going to add a transform. And what we're going to do is set the rotate X to 90 degrees, then a space, then we're going to translate the Z 100 pixels. So translate Z 100 pixels. Hit a semicolon, hit save, and now in the browser you can see what these transformation properties are doing to this top div element. So with that in place, let's come down here and let's target the front div. So .product space .box space .front. Put in our brackets. For the width, we're going to set this to 200 pixels as well. For the height, we're going to set this to 350 pixels. Next, we'll set a transform property. And the only thing we need to do here, since the front face matches the back face, we only have to move this in Z space. So we'll add translate Z, and we're going to set this to 100 pixels, then a semicolon. Hit save, go back to the browser. Here's our front panel now showing up. And then finally, let's add some transformations to the left div. So .product space .box space .left. Put in our brackets. The width and height are going to be the same. I'll come up here and copy these from the front class. Next, we'll add transform. We're going to set rotate Y. We're going to set this to negative 90 degrees. And we're also going to set translate Z here to 100 pixels. Add our semicolon, save your CSS, go back to the browser, and you'll now see the 3 faces of our box. So now that we have the basic shapes in place, this concludes part 1 of this 3-part series. Join me in part 2 where we'll add artwork to the sides of the box.